taking proactive steps to reduce the chances of a community spread. But how can any country survive without international trade? In this light, the global shipping industry has come under the spotlight as a very possible platform for such a spread. How much has the industry lost to coronavirus while scientists battle on to find a solution? How much more can be lost? To get more understanding, we're now being joined from our Rise Abuja studio by Hassan Bello, Executive Secretary and Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Shippers Council. Welcome to the program, sir. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Let's start by discussing the effects of coronavirus on global and Nigerian shipping and, of course, the corresponding drop in government revenue.
That is obvious. The coronavirus has had a devastating effect on world shipping. This means less deployment of ships. The whole world supply chain is disrupted. The international trade is down 80% through shipping. And if we have that disruption, it means revenue projections will have to be adjusted. In Nigeria, for example, 50% of our container trade is done with China. And one could easily see what that means. Contracts signed, deliveries and so on will be disrupted. But even more frightening is the fact that revenue projections from port operations will have to also suffer. This will be about 30% to 40%, depending on how long this pandemic, continue to disrupt. The whole artery, international artery, is actually clogged. And we may not see the effect right now, but maybe in 2-3 months later, you will see the devastating effect on the economy.
Thank you very much, sir. And speaking about the fact that you mentioned a 30 to 40% drop is what we're going to see or decline at our ports, let's speak about the adequacy as well of the Nigerian ports. I mean, is there any need for us to develop new ports or start using other ports? We can look at the Onne port, for example, that has a shorter turnaround time than the Apapa port, where it takes months for goods to get out. There are other ports as well, even being built at the moment or being commissioned for, like the Bakassi Deep Sea Port. Let's speak about that situation as a whole. Is there any need for us to develop new ports and use other existing ports at this time?
Yes, this is the time, more than ever, where we need to develop, deep sea ports. The one in Lekki, for example, will be a game changer. Together with the rail, Ibadan, Lagos, Ibadan, Kano, Port Harcourt, this will have significant impact on Nigeria's economy. The Lekki deep sea port, for example, is going to have about 6 million TEUs, per annum aggregate. It has the depth that is needed to have ships that will have 18,000 TEUs. The economies of scale will mean that Nigeria could be the hub that is needed, where we have lower vessels taking goods to other ports in the Central African sub-region. So it is important that we have this infrastructure. And what the central bank is doing is quite commendable, because there must be some intervention. The headwinds must be met, and the economy must be insulated, from the vagaries of oil price. And diversification of the economy must be an agenda, because this is the lesson we have to learn. And production. Nigeria could easily have been an alternative to China if we have our industries right. So I think apart from the disruption that we're having, which is, I hope, is temporary, it is very important to look at the issue of diversification. Let's be a productive economy. Let's look at the export rather than the import. We should cut our import bills and, in fact, support export. And that's what the Lekki Deep Sea Port, the other ports in Bakassi, in Onne, will be able to support the Nigerian economy.
You've raised so many issues here. I'm actually going to start off with trying to mitigate some of the losses that we're experiencing now and go to the Nigerian Shippers Council program that you have now, your intervention for cost reducing in Nigeria, because it is expensive to do business from the Lagos port. I have all kinds of statistics here. Apapa Port is 5 times more expensive than Durban Harbour and 3 times more expensive than Tema Port. And apparently the problem, apart from shipping charges and terminal costs, is the cost of local transport, which is 10 times higher in certain cases. Can we discuss that and what can be done about this issue and the intervention that you have currently embarked on?
A very good question. The issue of cost is very important. We have to make our ports competitive. We are competing with other ports in the Central and West African sub-region. And what the factor the shipper wants is cost is important in where he says his cargo should be dropped. And so we are looking at it globally. The issue of cost in Nigeria has to do with even the operating environment. It has to do with the infrastructure. It has to do with the ability to get the goods out of port as soon as they are landed. Port is not a storage place for cargo. Cargo should not be examined at the ports. There should be off-dock terminals where dry ports, for example, where these things should be examined. And so we are looking at the Lekki port, which will be delivered in 2 years' time, to see that we can make a modern port and put the issue of tariff, at the same time. But Nigerian Shippers Council is working assiduously to see that the cost is reduced, scientifically, though. And so we are having negotiations with all the shipping companies. We hope in 2 weeks' time we'll finish that. By the time we're through with the negotiation, shipping companies, terminal operators, and don't forget the government agencies. They also level costs. MPA has costs, NIMASA has costs. We have to all look at these things and come to a very scientific conclusion. But that will mean about 35% reduction in the cost of doing business in Nigerian ports. That will make us competitive, and we want to look at the efficiency, operational efficiency of the ports. We want to look at hinterland connection. How far can these goods removed from the port reach the final destination? So it is a whole gamut, and we are having the support of the federal government, to do this.
Thank you very much, sir. And you're right, maximizing the potential of our ports is key at this point. Operational efficiency, cutting costs of production, all to make us more competitive. And staying on that discussion of ports for just a minute and going back to just follow on from my last question a bit, what do you think is really militating against the patronage of eastern ports like Calabar, Port Harcourt, Warri, etc.?
First of all, it must be understood that it is the shipper who decides where his cargo will go. And it is an economic decision all the time. How many days will my cargo stay at the port? We're averaging 18 days dwell time in Nigerian ports in Lagos. But the eastern ports are there, and they should be patronized. The shippers should patronize the eastern ports. However, there are other issues like the issue of security, which the federal government is handling now. We have the issue of infrastructure, hinterland connection. I bring my goods to Calabar. How do I get it to Maiduguri, for example? What are the corridor, the rail, the road, and the other means of evacuating cargo from Calabar? What of the navigational issues? All these things, there must be a comprehensive Marshall Plan. And I'm calling for the Central Bank of Nigeria. The same intervention it has made in agriculture, in some other sectors, should have, the magnitude should be seen in the transport sector. We have to have patronage of the eastern ports. That will unclog Lagos. That will mean distributions. That will be creating of jobs, and growing the economy. So I think we need to look at this thing concertedly. We look at this thing deliberately. And we have to look at intervention. Is this the area of navigation? Is this the issue of security? Is this the issue of transshipping goods from Lagos, by smaller vessels to these ports? And I think one day we need to deliberately. So I want the focus of the central bank and other intervening agencies to look at the transport. You know, the transport sector needs a coordinated, linked strategy so that it can make the expected contribution to the national economy.
Transport angle is key, which is why I suppose our former colonial masters thought to have a rail system attached to the ports, but unfortunately, we are where we are. But you mentioned earlier Lekki Port, which will be ready in 2 years. I wanted to talk to you about Kaduna Dry Port and the strides that that is making, especially in the area of export. I think that's a really important success story to highlight and also to show what can be achieved if that port is maximized.
That's true. Kaduna Dry Port is an example of diversification. We have seen export rise, you know, export of agricultural produce and sometimes even manufactured goods from Kaduna Dry Port. Now, it is important that the federal government designate these dry ports as centers of export. There are still a lot of things to do, like capacity of rail, which is not so much. We're working with the Nigerian Railway Corporation to make sure that wagons, you know, are deployed specifically for Kaduna. Exporters could congregate and send exports. Cow horn are exported, ginger exported, and so many other variety of things. And every day we see this rising, despite the lack of other essential things. We don't have inspection companies, pre-export inspection in Kaduna. That the Federal Ministry of Finance should make sure that Kaduna is allocated pre-inspection shipping. We are working with Nigerian Custom, very good, because goods are examined in Kaduna rather than in Lagos. All containers, you know, we have a semblance of port community. Other regulatory agencies are in Kaduna. And you could see immediately that there is something happening within even the immediate premises of the dry port. We are now looking at the dry port in Kano.
Please, would you hold your thoughts, sir? We just need to take a short commercial break, and we'll be back with more on this topic. Please stay with us.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We're still joined by our guest in our Abuja studios, Mr. Hassan Bello, and we're looking into a number of issues with regards to shipping, our ports, coronavirus and the effects, etc. Thank you for staying with us on the program, sir. Tundun, over to you.
Thank you, sir. You were just going to finish your thoughts on the Kaduna Dry Port. You were starting to talk about the Kano Dry Ports.
Yes. Kano Dry Port, Funtua, Isialonga. Now, these are ports of destination and ports of origin, which means one can send the cargo directly there without going through the seaports. And this of significance. It will lower the transport cost. It will decongest the seaports. And it will also bring economic prosperity. All the port economy we experience in Lagos, in Port Harcourt, will be the same when we have the dry port in Kano, in Kaduna, in Aba and Funtua, Jos, and other places. So it is important that attention is given to these ports. And what is even more important is the integration of the infrastructure. There must be linkages. And I've seen the central bank supporting the dry ports so that we could export things more. This coronavirus effect of disruption of the economy has taught us one lesson, and that lesson is diversification. For example, we have to now have disruption in volatility of oil prices and so many other things. This will mean certain very important infrastructure could have delay in delivery, like the Ibadan-Lagos rail. You know, there must be some in April, second quarter. Now we'll have to push it to May or June. Also, the Ibadan dry port could be. But what is more important is the production. We need to diversify. We need to think of import, export. Export is very important to the life of this country so that we could insulate ourselves from the vagaries of the world economy, if we call. And that's why it is commendable what the central bank is doing. The dynamics, of the world situation. the intervention by the central bank to meet the headwinds, macroeconomic, interventions through other financial institutions like the pension fund and so on. This is quite commendable. And let me use this opportunity to also commend another sector, the health sector, that has been able to contain, this virus in Nigeria. It is quite commendable. It's comforting. The ministers of health, the various commissioners in Lagos State and others, because Lagos it's a port state and it's airports, places of embarkation and so on. So this means Nigeria has strong institutions, and we should also leverage on that and let the people know that this is what's happening.
Thank you very much, sir. And before we go into the health sector part of it, let's also speak about the recent news that Nigeria has recorded a trade deficit in the fourth quarter of 2019 of $579 billion. Billion naira, pardon me, for the first time since 2016. Now, of course, this is also to do with the closure of our land borders, which means that more goods have come in by sea, therefore being recorded. We're seeing real figures now that also kind of suggest that maybe Nigeria has even been in a trade deficit all this time. What is your take on this? What sort of pressure is it putting on the ports as well?
The trade deficit has to do with our ability to produce. Manufacturing, for example, it's very important to an economy. If we have more imports than export, that means we'll have trade deficit. We have large import bills, and we need to look at even our infrastructure. The Lekki Deep Seaport, we make sure that there are terminals for exports. We look at our economy and focus it on export, on processed export. Nigerian ginger, for example, is the best in the world. And so many things you hear, Nigerian, this is the best in the world, but we need to process it, we need to export it. Now, is the logistic chain has to be improved. There must be access to finance by exporters. There must be access to international market, and a deliberate policy, by Nigeria to make sure that we have more export than import. So if we have that, our trade deficit will have almost a balance, in terms of trade, which is also very important, especially now that, our population is what we rely on to take our domestic production. But things are pointing to the fact that a country must export or perish. And I think Nigeria should have deliberate policy to look at that, trade imbalance and correct it. And one of the things is production, manufacturing, and export.
That is really the unescapable bottom line, export or perish. I wanted to talk to you about a crucial topic, Cabotage Vessel Finance Fund. Now, the Nigerian Shippers Council had an event where the Minister for Transport, Rotimi Amechi, promised that after a 15-year promise and fail, come January, the modalities will be worked out to start the disbursement of the $200 million that's available to indigenous ship owners. There's been a committee set up to work out how it should be dispersed. Can you give us any updates?
Yes, the committee is working with stakeholders. It is very important to understand, again, international trade. It's important to understand our economy. We just don't buy ships for buying sake. We buy ships to tailor the modern trade routes, the commodities we're dealing with, what is our international advantages, in trade. So it's stakeholders' sensitization and the way to go about this. Many people will think it is a government like us, just for people to come and take. No, but this is also a direct economic intervention. Cabotage means place reserved for indigenous ship owners or ship operators. It's a protectionist idea, but we have to do that. It's done in America and others. That is, trading within the brown waters of Nigeria must be indigenous ships. Ship must be manufactured in Nigeria. They must be owned by Nigerians, and they must be run or operated by Nigerians. It's a beautiful, concept, but we have to give time, limits and phase out, in phases, to see how we could achieve that. But that is a reality. It's also an intervention. It has to be carefully done as an economic intervention, not a political one.
Certainly, sir, an economic intervention, not a political one, is key for that to work. Now, moving back to speak about the health effects of this that you brought up before, corona, etc., let's speak about the danger that is posed at our ports right now. Has the NCDC set up any quarantine centers at the ports? Are there any preparations or are there any things in place to test people at the ports that are coming in, to disinfect goods that are coming in that may have been infected by COVID-19? I'm asking this at a time where our neighbors in Senegal have just impressively actually new news that they've developed a 10-minute test kit, or they're going to be developing a 10-minute test kit for coronavirus with the UK. And these are the sort of scientific efforts that are really going to help curtail the virus. So what is your take on that? Are the NCDC firstly helping at the ports in terms of quarantining, etc.? Is there preparation at the ports to prepare workers and make sure workers are safe? What is your take?
The Nigeria Ports Authority, working with the authorities in the health, have already taken measures, to contain, because that's what we are doing, containment of that. At our various points of disembarkation, at the seaports and the airports, and even on the land border, we go through all the tests, to see those who are likely, affected. And I think this has gone, taking the culture. Nigerians have adopted that. So Nigeria is actually a country of strong institutions. And that we have only 2 cases, it's also an indication to show how serious we are. The health sector has really, is doing a lot to see that these things are contained. What we are having is a pandemic, as you said, which means with 180 countries. We see a whole country in Italy locked down. We see what's happening in the United States, sports activities, social activities, economic activities, markets shut. You see what's happening in the world trade. So Nigeria is not living in isolation. Nigeria is working hard to see that these things are also done in accordance with international practice. And that has given us comfort. That has given the internal economy also some comfort. We have not seen massive disruption, of our sporting events and other things. So these are temporary things. The whole coronavirus thing is going to be temporary. And as kiosks come or containment.
Thank you, sir. We've run out of time before we could talk about transit truck parks, but never mind. Thank you for joining us this morning.